Richard Miller was never particularly interested in antiques and rarely visited such shops, but on that rainy evening, he needed to pass the time before a meeting, and the only open place nearby was a small antique store with a faded sign. As he entered, a faint smell of old wood and dust enveloped him. The shop was crammed with items: cuckoo clocks, tarnished silverware, and paintings in heavy frames. But Richard's attention was immediately drawn to a bookshelf in the far corner. It was magnificent, tall, massive, and made of dark, almost black wood. Intricate carvings adorned its surface, depicting intertwining tree branches with faces and figures hidden within. The glass-paneled doors gleamed faintly, reflecting the dim light. Inside, a collection of old books rested, their yellowed pages hinting at their age. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice suddenly said behind him. Richard flinched and turned around. Behind him stood a man who was clearly the shop owner. Thin, with greasy hair and eyes the color of murky water, he smiled faintly. "This bookshelf came to me under strange circumstances," the man continued. "I was told to keep it, but never to open it. You, however, can have it. For free." Richard looked at the man with suspicion. For free? He knew such shelves were worth a fortune, yet, as if compelled by an inner impulse, he agreed. The bookshelf seemed like the perfect addition to his study. At home, Richard placed the bookshelf against the wall in his study. He barely had time to wipe the dust off the doors before his gaze fell on one of the books. Its cover was blank, without a title or author's name, only a strange engraved symbol resembling a peculiar key. Richard opened it. The letters inside appeared distorted, as if flickering and shifting whenever he tried to focus on them. The pages were yellowed, and the handwritten text exuded an air of antiquity. A chill ran down his spine. The book seemed to be watching him. He quickly closed it and put it back. That night, Richard was awakened by a strange noise. A faint rustling sound came from the study, as though someone was flipping through pages. Sleepy and annoyed, he went downstairs. But when he opened the door, he froze. The bookshelf emitted a faint green glow. Through the glass, he saw the books slowly shifting from their places, as if coming to life. When Richard stepped closer, the glow abruptly disappeared and everything returned to normal. He stood there in silence, staring at the dark glass-paneled doors. "Just my nerves," he muttered and returned to bed. But sleep did not bring him peace. Each day, Richard felt increasingly drawn to the bookshelf. Whenever he walked past it, it seemed to watch him. He was especially captivated by the book with the symbol. One day, unable to resist, he opened it again. This time, the text was clear. He began to read, and the words seemed to fill his mind. With each line, the room grew darker, the air thicker, and the walls seemed to close in around him. A voice, deep and hissing, echoed in his head. "Do you love to read? We can give you more." Terrified, Richard dropped the book. It hit the floor, and from it poured black smoke. The smoke swirled, forming shapes. From its depths emerged shadows, humanoid figures with empty eye sockets. They extended long, twisted arms toward him. The next morning, Richard resolved to get rid of the bookshelf. He called movers to take it to the dump. But when the workers arrived, the bookshelf was gone. Instead, his study was littered with scattered books. In a panic, Richard tried to explain that the shelf had been there. The movers only exchanged puzzled looks. That night, Richard was jolted awake by the sound of creaking wood. The bookshelf now stood in the corner of his bedroom. Its doors were ajar, and something inside was moving. The shadows within had grown sharper. They whispered, "You cannot leave. You are our book now." Richard felt his consciousness slip into a void. The last thing he heard was the ominous creak of the doors closing. The next morning, Richard was gone. His friends, worried, searched for him, but to no avail. His house was empty, and the bookshelf, no one could find it. The legend of the cursed bookshelf spread among antique dealers. Those who claimed to have seen it said that if you looked closely at the carvings on its doors, you could see faces, the faces of those who had dared to open its secrets. The winds of the lands between whisper of your deeds, tarnished. But can you withstand the thunderous clap of my approach?
Caitlin McNeely found the mirror on a Saturday at a yard sale in an old farmhouse. The house, once owned by the Caraway family, had long been considered a sinister place in the county. Even those who didn't believe in superstitions avoided it. No one truly knew what had happened to its last owners, but rumors of strange sounds emanating from the house drew those with a taste for dark romance. The mirror stood in a dusty corner room, as if it had been waiting for her. It was massive, with a silver frame intricately carved with patterns of grapevines. Despite the dust, it looked majestic. Caitlin couldn't take her eyes off its deep, dark surface. "This will be perfect for my living room," she thought, imagining how the mirror would add a cozy touch to the space. The price of $10 was too tempting to pass up. The seller, an elderly woman with deep wrinkles and an unsettling lack of expression, silently handed her the change. But as Caitlin headed to her car, the woman quietly said, "Don't look into it for too long." Her voice was hoarse yet filled with an odd sense of warning. Caitlin turned back, but the seller had already disappeared into the house. "She's probably just an eccentric old lady," Caitlin decided. Back home, Caitlin installed the mirror above the fireplace. It looked even better than she had imagined. The entire room seemed transformed, becoming more spacious and elegant. Her friend Sandy came over that evening to see the new purchase. "This mirror feels strange," Sandy said, frowning. "I don't know how to explain it, but it seems wrong somehow." Caitlin laughed. "You're just jealous I snagged it for $10. Sandy smiled, but her gaze lingered on the frame a little too long. That night, when Caitlin was alone again, she felt a strange unease. Though she wouldn't admit it, there was something unnatural about the mirror. It reflected the room perfectly, yet the reflection seemed to move slightly slower than the real world. She brushed off her thoughts. "It's just my imagination," she told herself, pulling a blanket around her. The next morning, Caitlin noticed that the mirror seemed cleaner. The dust on the frame had vanished as if someone had wiped it away. "Maybe I cleaned it and forgot," she muttered to herself, though doubt nagged at her. Later that evening, as she passed by the mirror, something in the reflection caught her eye. It was fleeting, but she thought she saw a large, dark figure move in the depths of the glass. "It's just a trick of the light," Caitlin reassured herself, though her heart quickened with unease. The following night, Caitlin woke with a start. She had the unsettling sensation that someone was standing beside her bed. The room was dark, but a faint silver light seeped in from the living room. "It's just moonlight reflecting off the mirror," she thought, but she couldn't shake the eerie feeling. Summoning her courage, she crept downstairs. The mirror stood silent and still, yet its surface seemed to glow faintly. When she returned to her room, she saw something strange in the reflection. A movement, shadows writhing in the depths. The next day, Caitlin decided to learn more about the mirror. She called a local antique shop to see if they could identify its age and origin. The shop's owner, Mr. Hudson, listened carefully to her description and, after a pause, said, "This mirror, it might date back to the late 19th century. I can't be sure, but it sounds like the work of French artisans. However, Caitlin, mirrors like that are often associated with legends." "What kind of legends?" she asked, gripping the phone tighter. "Mirrors that remember. Some say they absorb the energy of their owners. If you feel anything strange about it, I'd recommend getting rid of it." She brushed off his words, but they lingered in the back of her mind. On the third night, Caitlin heard whispers. They were soft, but distinct. She couldn't make out the words, but the voices sounded eerily familiar. Gathering her courage, she went downstairs. The mirror glowed faintly, and as she approached, she saw a figure in its depths. It was her, but her reflection was wrong. Her face was twisted with malice, stretched into a horrifying grin. "Let me in," the reflection whispered. Caitlin screamed, stumbling backward and knocking over furniture. She fled the living room, slamming the door shut behind her, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The next morning, Caitlin decided to destroy the mirror. She carried it into the yard and struck it with a sledgehammer. But instead of shattering like an ordinary mirror, it exploded into thousands of tiny shards. In each shard, she saw her own face, smiling that same unnerving, malevolent grin. Laughter echoed in her mind, and for a moment, she felt her consciousness slipping into the depths of those reflections. 3 days later, Caitlin disappeared. Neighbors noticed her absence and called the police. When officers entered her home, they found it empty. In the living room, the mirror hung above the fireplace, completely intact, as if it had never been broken. It waited once more. Now, the mirror resides in a small antique shop, where the shopkeeper, while polishing its surface, always warns prospective buyers, "Don't look into it for too long.